Welcome back to Wooden Sticks. As always, recording from the Aquarius Home Services studio. Early recording this week on a Tuesday. We've got some things cooking here at Talk North, and kind of cool that it's the day after a Stanley Cup game that looked pretty impactful as the Oilers had a complete meltdown in Sunrise, Florida in Game 3. And after Edmonton won Game 1, the defending champs have answered, winning the next two, and they look like they've got a pretty good hold of the Stanley Cup final. Pivotal Game 4 later this week. We'll get to that. And certainly everybody with all eyes on Billy Guerin this summer as we wait to see what types of moves our favorite hockey team here in the National Hockey League locally will make. Nothing as far as hot rumors go in terms of Marco Rossi. We're watching that. We're waiting to hear the term and the length of contract with Kirill Kaprizov. How long will it be? We're hearing 8 for $120, but we're not certain until we get those numbers. We don't know. Will there be a big trade? Is Tage Thompson an option? Buffalo looking to revamp their roster. Minnesota desperate for a high-end center. Lots and lots of things to keep an eye on, which we will certainly do, and try to have some guests that tie into these great storylines as we get to July when really the rubber meets the road. Today on the show, really looking forward to our guest. I always mesh pretty well with goaltenders, being that I'm an ex-goalie myself. But whenever we talk about the 1980 Olympic team and the Miracle on Ice, I get a little extra excited. The greatest sporting event that I ever witnessed, that will never change. I was 13 years old. I think I've told the story. Bunch of my buddies coming over for a birthday party in February. And I was one of the few people, I think I was the only person, at least on our hockey team. It was a bunch of my hockey teammates that were coming over that listened to the radio broadcast of the U.S. game against Russia, which actually took place in the mid-afternoon. And then the rebroadcast happened at 8 o'clock that night on national TV. And so I was sitting there like the cat that ate the canary when my buddies got over, and we did the knee hockey, we did the pizza party, and we got to watch the greatest upset in sporting history as the U.S. beat Russia 4-3. Today's guest lived it. He was a huge part of it. Steve Janaszak, who played high school hockey at Hill Murray, would go on to play for Herb Brooks and the Gophers and win a couple national championships there. And he and Jim Craig were the goalies on that team. So just can't wait to hear some of the behind-the-scenes stories from Steve Janaszak and really dive deep into his career because really some interesting connections that we have in the game of hockey. Jimmy Jetlin, who was a guest on this show a couple months back, he was a goaltending partner of Steve's at the U of M. Terry Skrypek, his coach at Hill Murray, was my coach at the University of St. Thomas. And then we shared a goalie coach in Warren Strelo. And Warren has passed away, but he's one of the all-time greats, considered a guru. He was the goaltending coach for Herbie Brooks, both at the U and on that fateful team at Lake Placid. And I was lucky enough to go to his hockey schools every summer as a young kid as I developed my game. And then I got to play college hockey with his son, Rick, who had one of the hardest shots I've ever seen. So lots of connections for Steve and I. And, I've over the years been lucky enough to meet players from that 1980 team and host events with them. And they're just so gracious with their time. They understand what a big deal it is for people to take a picture, to meet them. And for all of us on the broadcast side, these are the moments that you look forward to just a little bit more. And, the movie Miracle has brought that storyline to everybody of every age frame. But if you're of my age, if you're in your late 50s and you lived through that as a kid, as a hockey playing kid in 1980, it was unbelievable. It's something I still think about on a regular basis. They won that game on a Friday night. As I mentioned, I was hosting a birthday gathering, and then people forget they had to come back on that Sunday morning and win a game to validate that big upset and to actually qualify and get that gold medal. The old line from Herb Brooks is, "You'll take it to your effing grave." Well, I'll never forget going to church that morning with my dad, and we went to the 8 o'clock mass. I think the game was on at 11 a.m. because obviously the Olympics were in Lake Placid, so they had an hour time change to think about. I think the broadcast came on national TV, and my dad said, "Remember, don't get your hopes up. They can still lose." My dad, being the glass half empty guy, always was trying to set me up to make sure that I was ready for what might be a disappointing morning into the early afternoon, which it wasn't. They did trail throughout most of that hockey game and then did rally late to beat the Finns 4-2, and just an incredible time in a youngster's life. And I get to have that conversation today with Steve Janaszak, and I cannot wait. Like, I am so excited to hear from a guy that knew Herb Brooks about as well as anybody in terms of playing for that incredible coach. So we'll get to that shortly. Before we do that, I want to say thank you to some of our important sponsors on the show. Without them, this doesn't happen. And I'll start with my dear friend John Schweitz and Minnesota Masonic Charities. You know, when people think about the Freemasons, they often think about the secret handshakes and those crazy hats. And of course, they always have those cool pancake breakfasts. But Minnesota Masonic Charities would prefer that you think about the work they do right here in our community. Places like the Masonic Cancer Center at the U of M or the Masonic Children's Hospital. And of course, the Masonic Home over in Bloomington. Just a few examples, folks, of the important work that Freemasons support here in Minnesota. They're part of the largest fraternal organization in the world. Masons have consistently answered that call when it comes to charitable needs. I'm so happy that Minnesota Masonic Charities and John Schweitz have chosen our podcast as a place to help spread the word. And I'm looking forward here in the coming weeks to months to continuing that great momentum. Thank you to the Minnesota Masonic Charities. Also need to thank one of our newest supporters and partners. It's the great people over at 10K Construction.
Randy Shaver here. I'm bringing back Shaver's Prep Football Podcast beginning the end of July. Every week, we'll dive into the best of Minnesota high school football, and I'm proud to say we're now powered by 10K Construction, Minnesota's go-to guys for roofing, siding, decks, windows, and everything in between. After severe weather hits, they'll even come out and give you a free, honest inspection to make sure your home is in good shape. Schedule your free honest inspection today at 10kconstruction.com or call 763-200-6064 for more information. That's 763-200-6064. The land of 10K Construction.
And of course, if you live in Minnesota, everybody wants to get out on the lake. Why not keep an eye on everything that matters with Onyx Fish and Onyx Maps?
The weather is warming up. That means it's time to put your augers away and it's time to grab the boat. Let Onyx Fish help you find the next best bite. The Fish app offers the most comprehensive fishing tool for increasing your success. Use the Fish app to find new places to fish and sort lakes by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potential. Onyx Fish also shows you hot spots, lake-by-lake regulations, and private and public land ownership information. Download Onyx Fish on the App Store or go to onyxmaps.com/fish to get more information about the app that is changing the game.
And it's summertime. Got to get outside. Why not do it in a beautiful vehicle? Talk to my friends over at Lexus of Wayzata and Maplewood. Back with Olympic gold medalist, national championship goaltender, and former Hill Murray pioneer Steve Janaszak next here on Wooden Sticks. All right, welcome back to Wooden Sticks. As always, recording from the Aquarius Home Services Studio. Very honored and very excited to talk to Steve Janaszak today. Goaltender back in the day, played at Hill Murray, of course, was a Golden Gopher, two-time national champion, and a big part of the Miracle on Ice team for Herbie Brooks in 1980, as well as playing professional hockey in the NHL. Steve, thanks for doing this today. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun day. We've got so many weird connections through the game of hockey, but I want to go back to when it really first started to percolate. You know, Hill Murray has become a power in the state of Minnesota in high school hockey now for the better part of, 5 decades. And every year they're looked at as one of the teams to beat in the state tournament. When you started playing at Hill Murray, it was the 70s, and I think they were on the rise at that point. You helped put them on the map and were a big part of them becoming, by the early 80s, they were already a power in this state. How much did you know at that time when you were playing for Hill Murray and just starting in the program? And then when you got done and looked back, how much were you kind of excited about where you left the program because they soon became one of the state's elite?
Well, when I first started there, we were still part of the independent league and coached by a young Canadian fellow, Andre Ballou. And in fact, my class class of 1975 was the first class at the combined Hill High School and Archbishop Murray High School. So we were the first co-educational class of that time. And, Andre always had a winning team, a great program, but it was independent state. So we were the first independent, I think, to play in the state high school hockey tournament. And my recollection is that we ended up losing to Grand Rapids in the semifinals, but I think we put the largest crowd that had ever been in Met Sports Center to watch a hockey game in that game.
Which is, again, when I look back at some of the footage of all the old tournaments, people, I think, always remember the Civic Center and the clear glass, but the Met Center, which was just an unbelievably cool venue, and for all of us of a certain age that were North Star fans like myself, got a real, up close look at that later in life. But that was where the tournament was. I look back at what happened with Henry Boucher and some of that footage, and they were always big crowds. So to be a part of the biggest crowd, and for a high school kid, Steve, there's nothing quite like a state tournament. And for something new like what you guys did at Hill Murray, that had to give it just a little extra juice as well.
Well, it was a very, very special place to play. And I mean, like I say, we lost Grand Rapids. I mean, you won a state championship, so you know very, very well what that's like.
It's one of those moments in time where you look back 40 years later and it feels like it was literally a couple years ago. It's amazing how fast time goes. We were at the tournament this year. I had a chance to work it on the TV side, and I almost stuttered sometimes saying it's been 40 years because it doesn't feel like it. And I'm certain with some of the milestones in your hockey career, and you've got many, many more, it does catch you off guard sometimes when you look at the clock and see how much time has gone by.
Well, where it really caught me off guard is we do this hockey camp up in Lake Placid for the past 10 years or so. And I saw all the goaltenders playing, all these old guys. And I thought, I hadn't played in probably a dozen years. I thought, I can do this. But it's a young man's game. There's no doubt.
It really is. But it's still, I've heard all kinds of cool stories about that camp. And I've been to Lake Placid. I was lucky enough a handful of years ago. I was at Saratoga Racetrack on a horse racing trip, and there was an off day on the horse side of things. So my buddy and I hopped in the car. We were over in Saratoga Springs. We made the drive, which is a beautiful drive. Went to Lake George, went to clearly where the Olympics were. I couldn't wait to get into that arena. Steve, I can't believe the footprint and how small. I still can't believe, having been to Lake Placid, that they put a Winter Olympic Games on that footprint.
Okay, so you've been there, and you have to imagine coming out of the arena and looking down onto Main Street, and it's packed, and there's a light snow falling, and people are singing the national anthem and chanting USA, USA, and it was the entire region was out that night. It was truly amazing.
Well, I've been a sports junkie. Well, I'm 58 right now, and I think I started when I was 5 or 6. And I'm the type of guy, when I was a kid, every book report, every art project revolved around hockey. My art was drawing goaltenders. So I can tell you this as a 13-year-old watching the 1980 Olympic Games, and I can tell you now as I'm nearly 60, there will never be, and there never has been, a sporting event that I was able to take in that comes close to what you guys did in 1980. And I've been lucky enough to MC some banquets, including one last summer, and do stuff like we're doing today, where I get the chance to visit with some of you guys. And it takes me back to one of the greatest places in my life. And I was only a spectator. So I can't imagine for a person like you to take it all in. I mean, you were there living it. And, I think the movie did a lot of young people now in our world, like the guy next to me and my producer Alex, some good to kind of get a window into what that was like. But unless you lived in the U.S. in 1980 and knew how tough it was, and my parents, middle class, in Burnsville, Minnesota, like that was one of those moments in time that went far beyond the rink.
I agreed with you wholeheartedly. I think as a former goaltender, you'd appreciate it. I mean, we scored 4 goals on 16 shots against the Russians. And that was a period of time where in the National Hockey League, you were averaging 1 goal for every 13 or 14 shots. So it was the perfect combination of the guys on that team. I would put them up against anybody in any environment. Tiddlywinks. I mean, this group just hated to lose.
Well, and it's Tretiak, who at the time is the greatest goaltender on the planet. And I think the movie did a really nice job of covering what a big deal that was, because all of us watching the game, and even as a young teenager, we all knew who Tretiak was. We knew that the Russians had come to North America and whipped through National Hockey League teams for a couple of years, the best teams in the league. And I mean, whipped them, beat them 5-1, 6-0. So for these college kids, you guys, to do this, I think the landscape, not only in America, because it was a downtrodden time in our country, but then I look at from that point on, and I've had this conversation with some of your teammates, the impact it had on college hockey players getting an actual opportunity to play in the National Hockey League. It flipped the script, and that was a tipping point. And Herbie knew that would happen if you guys could pull that off, but it certainly did.
Herb had a good feel for everything that was going on at the time. And you take a look at that environment, right? We end up winning the game. I talked to Mike Richter a number of years ago, and here's a guy who, had a fantastic career as a goaltender. I mean, unbelievable. And he basically is reflecting the same thing that you're reflecting back to me in terms of what that victory meant to him as a young goaltender.
Kevin Gorg here in the studio for Wooden Sticks, being happy to be joined by Steve Janaszak from the 1980 Miracle on Ice team. Before we got to Miracle on Ice, though, you were able to have a pretty unbelievable career for Herbie, playing for the Golden Gophers at the U of M. And I'm curious to know how many options you had after your time at Hill Murray, and how you made the decision to go play for your hometown team. Because a lot of kids, especially high-level athletes, decide they want to go elsewhere and get away from home. But back then, man, putting that M on the front of your sweater was a pretty big deal. How did that decision come together for you?
Kevin, I mean, there was no place else really to go if you wanted to play hockey and wanted to play for one of the best programs in the country. I mean, I had a lot of other opportunities. I was very fortunate, had good grades, blah, blah, blah. But Herbie came, and I'll tell you what, he was the best salesman I have ever seen. He's sitting at the kitchen table with my mom and dad. I mean, there was no other place I was going to go once he was done with his pitch.
I was lucky enough to get to know Herbie over the years. I grew up playing hockey basically against his son, Danny, all the way up through Pee-wees and Bantams and into high school. And Herbie was down in Faribault at the running his hockey schools, and my dad was the golf pro at the Faribault Golf and Country Club. So Herbie, being the salesman that you just referenced, early on in his tenure in Faribault, came over to the golf shop and sat down with my dad and said, here's the deal. I've got 8, 10, 12 guys I coach with. How about we get to come over and play golf and take a card out a couple times a week, free of charge. And your kid, who I know is a decent goalie, gets to come to our hockey school whenever he wants for as long as he wants. And my dad said, deal. This is Herb Brooks. I can't say no to Herbie. So you're right. He was a salesman, and he was such a unique character. And I've heard the stories. I just can't wait to hear your perspective of spending those 4 years at the U with Herbie and the ups and downs that had to provide.
Well, Kevin, I'm fond of saying that I played for him for 5 years, and I have the emotional scars to prove it. But the man had a bigger impact on my life than anybody outside of my parents. And he was one of those coaches, unique in the sense that he could draw out of you something that you didn't know you had. The level that I played at Minnesota, I didn't know that I could ever play at that level. But he, one way or another, he would pull it out of you.
And I think it probably, in looking back, came to a crescendo. I mean, I looked at your numbers, and they do tell quite the story as you developed into one of the best, if not the best, college hockey goalie in the country. The final run to a national championship in 1979. I also remember this game vividly. The goal scored by Neil Broughton. It was at the old Olympia in Detroit.
Yes.
You talk about an old school building and an old school rivalry, Minnesota and North Dakota. It doesn't get any better than that. And for you to have not only a national championship and to be the backbone of that hockey team, but to beat your rivals from North Dakota. Take us through that season and what made it so special outside of the obvious, which is winning.
Well, you got to the final series of the season, and we were down a game to North Dakota, and we beat them on Friday night. So here we're playing the final game of the season on Saturday night in our home building for all the marbles for the WCHA championship. And they beat us. They beat us badly. I gave up a couple of goals that I should never have given up. My recollection is Davey Christian was wide open from the red line when we had pulled the goaltender at the end of the game, and he stopped and threw up a big spray of ice right before the net, and then just cranked a slap shot into the net, just in the face of the home crowd.
Wow.
But we came back and figured out, you can appreciate this. I was off my angle on a couple of shots, figured that out, and beat them in the final game. And the goal from Neil Broughton is one of the classic goals. The kid hit a perfect wedge shot right over the goaltender, coming sprawling out to get the puck.
It's iconic. They still will show that goal in some of the intros when ESPN is covering the NCAA tournament. Year in and year out, they still show that goal. I still get chills every time I see it. Neil Broughton specifically, I've also had a chance to get to know Neil over the years. As quirky as Herb Brooks is, I would put Neil in a quirky but different category. Sweetheart of a guy, just a remarkable hockey player to watch. What was he like as a teammate?
He was just a kid, right? And you talk about, I'll back up a little bit and talk about going to the state tournament. I remember watching he and his brother and Butsy Erickson play on the line. And nobody could touch those guys. Once they got the puck, nobody could get the puck away from him. He was a quiet kid, and it's one of those things that I'll never forget. I had a chance to play with the greatest American hockey player to ever play the game.
Mm-hmm. Can't be argued. I mean, day in and day out, you were with him.
Mikey Ramsey tells a story about how evidently Bratz's line had scored on every first shift of a particular season, and Rammer went up to play them up in northern Minnesota, and Rammer was determined that Bratz wasn't going to score on him, and it took him like 17 seconds.
Jeez. Yeah, it's incredible. I remember watching that line and that team with Rozo and all of us in the Twin Cities always were fascinated to see teams from the up north, because when you live in the Twin Cities, you get to go, and there's a rink around every corner. You can go watch high school hockey every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, but you never really get a chance to see the teams from up north. So back in those days, when the Warroads and the Rozos and the Grand Rapids would come down for the state tournament, for all of us in the cities, it was a really big deal. And they were always ballyhooed. They always had rink rats like those guys, and they were always so good. And so it was part of the charm of the one-class state tournament. I played in 1985, still a one-class tournament. We hadn't seen Hibbing all year. They were ranked 1 or 2 in the state, right up with us, but they were like a mystery team because nobody had seen them. There was a mystique around some of those teams, and that made, I think, the tournament that much more magical.
I agree wholeheartely. And just the stories that you would hear about whole towns emptying out and coming down to the cities to watch the team that they had watched all year play in many cases and win.
Unbelievable. So How realistic was the movie Miracle with the announcement of who would get to represent their country? Because certainly ultra competitive at every position, including yours. And for any young college hockey player to get the chance to represent their country and play in the Olympics on U.S. soil, mind you, I think when you finally figured that out, it had to be a pretty big deal. But how realistic was the way it was portrayed in the movie?
Well, I think I give Disney a lot of credit because Disney did the right thing. They made it the right way. There's some artistic license, of course, but that's Hollywood. And it was Herb's story, right? Herb had a gold medal taken away from him in 1960 as the last player cut from that team. And, by God, he was going to figure out a way to get that back. And to the extent that we were his lab rats, as it were, it was successful and he won. I'll never forget, we won in 1979. Never forget, I was sitting outside the Bierman Field Athletic Building the summer of 79 after we won. And I'm reading an interview in the Minneapolis Trib that Herb was responding to a reporter's question about what would it take to win in Lake Placid. And he said, and I remember distinctly, I said, if we're going to win in Lake Placid, we're going to need good goaltending. And of course, I broke out into this big smile. And the next line was classic Herb Brooks. And this kid, Jim Craig, is one hell of a goaltender.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So the gauntlet was thrown down early.
And I remember when I was of that age, 22, 23 years old, emotionally, I wasn't the man I am today. You not only were recruited by this guy, you had 4 unbelievable years. It crescendoed in a national championship. And I can't imagine the emotion involved even in just reading that. And listen, Jim Craig was a great goalie. We all know that. But you at that time were widely considered the best goaltender in the country. And by the way, the guy that's the head coach is the guy that recruited you and developed you. So it had to be, for a young guy, kind of shocking and I don't want to say depressing, but certainly disappointing.
Or just personality-wise, or it was the ultimate challenge. And I viewed it as the ultimate challenge. It's like, okay, I'm going to have to beat this guy for a job. And to his credit, Jimmy was one hell of a goaltender. He beat me for the job. But Herb Brooks, again, to his credit, when he was cutting guys before we went to Lake Placid, I was in that mix. We were still carrying 3 goaltenders, still carrying the fellow from Michigan Tech. His name's escaping me right now. But so, Herbie would sit down and he says, you can go to Lake Placid if you want, but if you go, understand that you're probably not going to play.
Jeez.
And so I said, Herb, it's the Olympics. Of course I'm going to go. And we stood up, shook hands. His last words to me as a player were, and I'm paraphrasing it, were shook hands. He said, don't screw it up. Of course, he didn't say screw it up.
Right.
But I think at the end of the day, we mentioned a little bit about Jimmy Jetland before. I mean, Jet was my template for how to back up another player.
There's an art to it. I've done it. And, it takes a team first person to be selfless. In fact, this most recent season with the Minnesota Wild, as we watched a young goalie by the name of Philip Gustafson develop into a elite goalie in this league, soon to be Hall of Famer Marc-Andre Fleury, rotated into that spot as the backup, wanting to play, competing every day in practice to play, missing the thrill of playing, but being that support system for a young kid that really leaned on him as a veteran goalie. And as you know, Steve, goaltenders kind of set the tone, like a quarterback or in football or a pitcher in baseball. And if there's something off there, it can have a ripple effect that brings an entire team down. So I know what Herbie was saying, and you lived it. Like, you have to be that guy, but it's certainly not easy.
Well, there are two thoughts I have, Kevin. One is it was the hardest job I've ever done because, as you know, you're wired to play.
Mm-hmm.
You're not wired to sit, and especially sit and keep your mouth shut. And the other thing is, you mentioned Tretiak earlier. I'd like to dial back to that because Herb always played for the 1-0 game. You don't make any mistakes, and you capitalize on at least one of the mistakes that your opponent makes. And not all mistakes are made on the ice. And I firmly believe, and I mean, again, you're a goaltender. You know Tretiak at the time. I'm thinking after giving up those 2 goals in the first period that he probably doesn't give up another competitive goal for like 6 months.
I agree.
So pulling him out was the mistake. And not to say anything bad about Mishkin, because Mishkin was one hell of a goaltender, but he wasn't Vladislav Tretiak.
The closeness.
I don't know.
This is Mark Rosen. Check out my weekly podcast, Rosen Sports Monday, on the Talk North Podcast Network. Each week, I break down everything in Minnesota sports with in-depth analysis and a guest-driven format. You'll hear from media insiders, superstar athletes, and legends of the game. Don't miss it.
You're right. And certainly looking back, that had to be something that gave your club some wings. But to me, getting to know you guys now, 40, 45 years later, how even though you don't see each other on a regular basis, when you come together, and you were just at that camp, how tight you guys still are. It takes me back to the locker room. Like the guys are giving each other barbs and messing with each other. And I had 6 or 8 guys on a panel this past summer led by Mike Ruzioni, and I was the mediator, and I couldn't keep up. And Rammer was there. It was incredible. But I see now what the movie tried to kind of depict, and it's hard to do it in 2.5 hours, but in months like you guys had leading into these games, there is something magical about the group. There's that chemistry that I think makes or breaks it for a hockey club, and you guys certainly had chemistry at the highest level. And I don't know how you felt with Jim Craig, but it looked like everybody was connected.
It was an incredible chemistry, and I think Buzzy Schneider captured it the best. He said, Herb treated us all the same. He treated us like crap. And to the extent that it forced everybody to come together and kind of row in the same direction, it was incredibly successful. I don't know if you can coach like that today, but what he did, and you can see it as you referenced, getting guys together today. Unfortunately, it's the same jokes. I mean, the jokes haven't changed in 45 years.
They mentioned that actually at the event I was at this past August, and it was still so much fun just to see the group come together and laugh. And they're on a stage with microphones, so they probably kept it cleaner than it was in the room, but you could feel the love. Honestly, you could feel that connection that all you players certainly have. So you mentioned, and you set it up beautifully with Lake Placid and the snow falling. This is way before internet. So for the young people listening to this podcast, and we've got a bunch of hockey fans that are much younger than you and I, there was a groundswell during these Olympics. It came in real quiet. You guys were maybe hoping to medal. I think everybody that was watching was hoping you guys would be competitive. But then as this thing started kind of getting its momentum and you guys started rattling off these wins, it switched and it became the story of the Olympics. But without the internet to really just make it pop like things do now, how secure were you guys, and how did Herbie keep you sheltered, or did you also kind of walk around Lake Placid feeling this thing coming together?
No, we were very sheltered. And, it's amazing because one of the things that really comes out of that experience is the power of a group of people who live and breathe and think as a single individual. The whole is clearly greater than the sum of the parts in a situation like that. And, Herb basically wanted to keep us sheltered, keep us focused. I think he did a good job doing that. I do remember seeing Eric Heiden win gold medals on the speed skating rink down from the hockey rink. But other than that, we really were pretty much cloistered, as it were.
How loud was that building? Because having been to that building, it's pretty small, and on TV, it sure felt pretty loud.
Kevin, I went back there probably 10 years after the fact, took my wife Jackie and our daughters and went back up. And I walked in that building for the first time. I had to sit down. I started shaking. I remember saying to Craig Patrick, after we tied that game, before Eurazione scored the go-ahead goal, you could look up and you could see the rafters, the beams shaking. It was so loud.
I can't imagine.
I remember saying to Patty, I mean, if we score another goal, this place is going to collapse.
So Eurazione does score that goal, and there's still half a period of hockey to go. You're on the bench, and I really like the way the movie handles the closing minutes and uses some of the actual call from Al Michaels, who's without a doubt one of the all-time greats in a play-by-play spot. But for you on the bench to be privy to the conversations of the coaching staff and the players, and every player I've talked to talks about how slow that clock was going when you have got a lead against this team and you know you're about to pull off the greatest shocker in sporting history. What was it like to be on the bench?
So I think Dave Silk said it best. So the shifts were really, really short because nobody wanted to be on the ice when the Russian Bear woke up. So yeah, and again, Herb just was incredibly methodical, just to play your game kind of mindset. And by that time, we had gone through the incident with Robin McClanahan being injured and having come back, and so this was a group of guys where everybody on the bench was pulling for everybody on the ice all the time at that point. It was really amazing. Very powerful.
It's still powerful to this day, and it's still one of those movies, if it pops on and I'm clicking around, I can't turn away. I bet you I've seen it 50 times. I was coaching women's college hockey when it actually came out in the theater, and I was smart enough to rent a theater out and bring our entire staff and our entire team and parts of their family to kind of a sneak preview of the movie, not knowing anything.
That's brilliant.
It was so powerful for our team to see it. And we went on to have a really pretty incredible season, won a conference championship for the first time, went on to do some good things in the playoffs, got to the NCAA tournament. I look back at that moment that winter when we gathered to watch that movie, because we had watched, back in those days, Steve, on our bus trips, playing Division III women's hockey, you'd pop in those old DVDs or VHSs, and we had all the documentaries involving your team and involving some of those great storylines. But to see it on the big screen and to see those storylines, and and again, we're a Minnesota college hockey team, so you've got all these Minnesota kids on the roster, and I mentioned Katie Jetlin. There were some real tie-ins that really had a ripple effect on our team. And you guys were just a bunch of college kids. And I still look at that event, and I've watched every sport all these years later. I can't come up with another game that comes close to what you guys were able to accomplish.
Well, and first of all, I have to say, my memory is not what it was, but it was Bruce Horsch was the third guy. Michigan Tech. Yep. South St. Paul prior to that. And again, an awesome goaltender. But coming back to the movie, I mean, I don't know. When I talk to people, and a young fellow conversation I had just in the last couple of months, road crew for one of the Ivy League schools. He said for all of their bus trips, they would pop in the movie Miracle. And he said all the freshmen would come in, and of course they had their own favorite movies that going on a 3-hour bus ride, and they would want to pop in. All the seniors say, no, you don't understand. we watch the movie Miracle on the bus ride. And if it's a longer bus ride and it's longer than the movie, then we watch it twice.
That's so cool.
So, and again, so of course I had to ask him if he ever watched, Boys in the Boat.
Oh,
and of course he did. And I will say this: I was talking to a group of little kids out on Long Island a number of years ago. This little girl raised her hand. She wanted to know what position I played, so I told her I was a goaltender. She said, "You don't look like a goaltender." I said, "That's because for the last 10 years, I've been a bond salesman." She looked at me. She said, "You don't look like a bond salesman either." And of course, it was Olympic week, so I asked them if they had watched the movie Miracle, and they had. And the same little girl raised her hand. She said, Miracle's a good movie. I really like the movie Miracle, but my favorite movie is Seabiscuit.
Uh-oh.
But hey, I love Seabiscuit too. And but again, it's the David versus Goliath story.
Yep.
And I think Disney told it the right way. And how else are you gonna show it? I don't know.
It's the tale as old as time. You mentioned David versus Goliath. It plays out. And that's why we are drawn to the games we love. And you mentioned you were off your angle in one of the games at the U of M, and I thought of Warren Strelo. Long time goalie guru, I'll call him. I was lucky enough to go to all his goalie camps in the summers over the years. I played college hockey with his son, Ricky, at St. Thomas. But I remember specifically, and I know you'll know this, he would tie the ropes to the pipes and create this triangle, right? And then he would show you. It still works to this day. Like I'm watching the meltdown that was the Edmonton Oilers last night and watching their big, goalies now are all 6'5", right? Even today, God. The angle comes into play that he was talking about all those years ago. Warren Strelo was unbelievable at breaking it down to its most simple facts. And if you didn't have the proper angle, if you weren't square to the puck, you had no chance.
Nope. He was decades ahead of his time. And so we had a puck shooting machine at Minnesota. and Warren loved that puck shooting machine. I mean, that was his favorite little toy. So Jimmy Craig comes on with the Olympic team, and Warren's trying to describe to him, use the puck shooting machine. And so they're out at roughly just inside the blue line, and I'm in the net, and Warren's shooting the shots. And I see the conversations getting a little bit heated. Jimmy doesn't want to do this. And Warren's moving the machine around, and puck shooting machine is like a baseball pitching machine. You hear the puck drop into the chute, and then the tires spin it, so it's clunk, bang. And so the speed's going up, and the machine's moving around. And I hear clunk, bang, and the next thing I know, I got hit square in the middle of the forehead.
Ooh.
Knocked me flat on my back. And I remember looking up, and there's Jimmy just shaking his head, skating off the ice.
That was the end of that.
That's the end of that. I think that's one of Jimmy's favorite stories. But, Warren, the angles, of course, you're going to go and you get scored on a couple of times, lose a championship game. You're going to go back to basics and figure it out. And fortunately, he was there to be able to do that. And give a lot of credit to Herb, because I don't think Herb really knew how to deal with goaltenders very well. So he delegated that to Warren, and Warren was probably one of the best of all time.
He was way ahead of his time. You hit the nail on the head. And I don't know if he did this with you guys, but at some point when we were on the ice in those summer camps, he would bring out an actual camcorder, and then he would have a chair he would sit in, and he would get right about at the blue line. He brought these Division I skaters out that would line up at center ice, and they would come in a breakaway format, but a lot of times they would end up shooting the puck so we could kind of get into our position and back in with the shooter if they kept coming and stuff like that. And then you would finish your sequence, and then you'd sit down with Coach Strelo, and he'd walk you through the videotape. Now, for kids that play now, I mean, they've got tablets on the bench, and this is a normal thing. But I can tell you, as a young goalie in the late 70s and early 1980s, this had never been done. And to actually have that immediate impact of seeing yourself in the net facing these Division I shooters had a huge impact on all of our growth as young goalies. Did he bring the video into play with you guys, or was that later down the road?
That was actually later down the road. The best that we had at the time were the game footage.
Oh yeah.
And so you'd go back and watch that, and still the good news is for both of those environments is that it's still fresh in your mind. You know, as a goaltender, Kevin, I mean, what you were thinking, how you moved when, say, one of those events happened, and you know kind of immediately by watching it what you can do better.
How much hockey do you watch now, and do you watch the game as a hockey fan, or do you watch it as a former goalie and imagine if you had some of the gear these guys have, and if you were facing maybe some of the technology and the shooters that they're facing, how you would fare? Because I find myself always going back to my position when I watch the game of hockey, wondering how you watch it.
Well, I do everything in life as a goaltender. And when I watch hockey, I watch it as a goaltender, watch the goaltenders. The equipment is amazing. When I got equipment to go back and play at that hockey camp, I called Robbie Stauber up, and Staub sent me some used stuff. And it's totally lost on me. I remember kneeling down for a team photograph, and I thought I was kneeling on the pad as you would normally kneel on the pad. And I got the photograph back. I looked at it, and the pad actually, I was kneeling on the padding that was on the inside of my knee, because the pad had actually rotated out, butterflied itself. Totally lost on me, man. I had no idea how to use this stuff.
I vividly remember having to move my pads back into position. They had the deer hide when I played in the early 80s, and I always had to kind of push it and move them. And then once in a while, if you get a scramble around the net, there'd be a skate blade that would rip a little hole in the pad. And then you have the deer hide kind of leaking on to the ice in your crease area. You'd have to scrape that away. These are things that goalies in this generation don't have to worry about. But for us, those pads were wet. They were heavy. And yeah, I always had to move them into place. Yeah,
no, it's just, that was part of the game at that time. I mean, it was, the technology has changed dramatically. The personnel has changed dramatically. I don't know. I look at these kids now. I don't even think they look at a kid under 6'2". We were out in Las Vegas for the 40th anniversary. And they brought us out on the ice to drop the puck before the game. I remember standing there, and one of the Vegas Knights goaltenders was there. And of course, I'm in street shoes, he's in his skates, but I'm looking up. And this kid, when he dropped down on his knees, his shoulders still covered the crossbar.
Yep.
I mean, holy God, what could you do with that kind of size and that kind of equipment?
Yeah, it really is a different position. You look at the average goaltender now and their size compared to what we grew up with. I'm lucky enough to broadcast and get to know some of the national guys. Darren Pang was a pretty damn good NHL goalie. I'm not certain that when he was on skates, that his goalie mask was much above the crossbar. He's a little guy. He was a good goalie for the Blackhawks, but he was a little guy. He would never have a chance today.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. And the physical skill set that guys like Pang had. I remember meeting Gump Worsley, playing for the Minnesota North Stars at the time, finishing up his career. He's just a little pint-sized piece of a guy, but incredibly athletic. And just kind of, you just knew he was in your face, you're not going to score on me, not a chance. And kind of mindset.
Crazy enough to play the position without a mask or a helmet, which I see old pictures. I can't imagine the courage that took.
Kevin, I remember looking at him, and I'm a senior in high school, shaking hands, and I look at his face, And the scar tissue around his eyes, it looked like he was looking at me through a couple of tunnels. I thought, oh my God, this is what I have to look forward to?
He was a different looking dude, but man, that you're right. He could move. And I look at the bingo card here, and you're a young goalie. You aspire to play high school hockey. You go to a state tournament. You get to go on and play Division I hockey, winning national championships. You're part of Miracle on Ice, winning the gold medal. But for a kid from Minnesota, you eventually get the chance to not only play in the National Hockey League, but for a Minnesota kid, put on a Minnesota North Stars sweater. I got to tell you, they were my club growing up. That had to be a remarkable accomplishment emotionally for you and your family.
That was a very special night. I mean, worked through a 2-2 tie against Buffalo, and my God, I mean, yeah. Of course, played for a while after that. Reached my level of incompetence in the Central Hockey League, and you know, and then had to go on and find a real job.
The other thing, and I was having this conversation with a couple of the higher ups here at the Talk North studios before we started our show today, and I've had the chance to get to know you guys. A lot of the gentlemen that played on the team in 1980, all amazing hockey players. But what stands out to me, and I coached Buzzy Schneider's kid when I was a boys high school coach at Mounds View, is how unbelievably successful the group has been away from the rink. Take away the hockey, take away all the hockey, and focus on what you guys have done as a group of individuals off the ice. I don't think, Steve, it's a coincidence. I don't believe that at all. But, you know, doctors, dentists, financial world, like high level, unbelievable success. Looking back, anything you can point to in that locker room?
You know, I see it from a goaltender's perspective, because personally, all right, I'm never going to win a game. You need to score goals to win a game. All I can do is lose it. And, you know, you learn to dot your I's and cross your T's, and don't make mistakes, work hard, and understand that if you make a mistake, you give up the one goal, you're not going to give up two. You give up two, you're not going to give up three. And, you know, I mean, how many times, Kevin, have you been told no goals in the first 2 minutes of a period and the last 2 minutes of a period?
Yep.
I mean, it's all the little things. And I think, again, thinking about the group of guys that we were with in 1980, and a lot of them were with us in 79. And these were guys who did all the little things right. So, yeah, I mean, it's immediately applicable. I mean, I tried to tell a young kid once, I mean, I know from personal experience, you're going to be sitting there in the boardroom and making a presentation. You're going to look around and say, you know what? None of these guys have ever been up a goal with 3 minutes to play and having the world falling apart around them. It's just, it's a level of experience that you get that is immediately applicable to the rest of the real world.
Great point. Very poignant the way you put it. Voice of Steve Janaszak, goaltender from the Miracle on Ice team in 1980. And fans, you can get the opportunity to come meet Mr. Janaszak this Thursday, the 12th, Talk North Sports Report, led by legendary broadcaster Mark Rosen over at the Parlay Kitchen and Bar in Northeast Minneapolis. 4:00 this Thursday. You're not going to want to miss it. We've come to the final segment, Steve. This is the fun part, the loosey-goosey part of the show. We call it the Hat Trick Hot Seat. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. It's going to give us kind of a window into your background. This first one is my very favorite question. I ask it to almost every single guest, and we're both over 50, so we're in that same category. I want to know the first concert you attended. I want to know the band, and I want to know the venue, since you grew up here in the Twin Cities.
Sha-na-na in Minneapolis. I don't necessarily recall the venue, but it was a great concert. I remember that.
I bet it was incredible. Might have been the Armory, I'm guessing, because maybe back then they housed basketball and concerts. And now they do concerts. They've kind of revamped it. They do concerts there again. But the fact that it was Sha Na Na, spectacular. My dad used to have all that stuff cooking in the car when we drive down to Faribault from Burnsville to go work at the golf shop. You've traveled everywhere, whether it's airplanes or buses, whether it's hockey or the financial world. When you want to get away from hockey or your successful career, where is your favorite vacation spot to travel to?
Just a very private guy. The pool out back.
Great answer.
It works.
Yeah, my folks built one my senior year. I was bitter. I had 2 younger sisters, and they were going to get to reap the benefits of having that pool in high school. I was just leaving the house to go play in the USHL in Des Moines, and they built that pool. But I can tell you it's been a gathering point now for 40-plus years for kids and now grandkids to come use. What a great thing to have right in your backyard. You don't need to travel anywhere.
Well, yeah, no, and I'll give credit to our youngest daughter who came in when we were down on Long Island. She said, "You know what? We're gonna get a pool," and she was adamant and figured out how to put it in the backyard. The backyard was a little postage stamp, but it worked, and that was, I think you hit on it, Kevin. It was a gathering place.
The best.
It was where all the friends came.
You've mentioned Seabiscuit. We've talked about Miracle. If you're going to sit down and watch a movie, and let's just pretend, I know it's hard to pick one, but if you're going to watch, let's say it's not Miracle because you're in Miracle. Let's just say it's a movie that you want to watch. It's maybe one of your all-time favorite movies. Which one would you pick on a night where you're just going to chill at home?
I would say you mentioned Top Gun before. That's immediately come to my mind. Boys in the Boat. I mean, stories like that where you see guys fighting through adversity and coming up and winning.
Boys in the Boat is a hidden jewel. And I think a lot of our listeners probably maybe missed it when it came through a couple years ago at the theater. I saw it twice in the theater. I've seen it a couple times since. Top Gun's, it's one of the all-time greats. It can't be argued. And sequel's pretty damn good too. But Boys in the Boat, great tout by you, because that's a movie that a lot of our listeners probably missed. And it's incredible. It's a true story like Miracle, and it has all the right messaging.
Well, and again, talking to the fellow who crewed up here in the Northeast, I mean, it also does justice to the work that those guys that row put in. I mean, it's a lot of sweat and tears that, in this case, they won. They don't always win.
Great point. I can't thank you enough today for making time for us. I know you're going to be in town here in a couple of days. Look forward to having you join Mark Rosen and all of our avid fans here at Talk North. Steve, again, really, really appreciate you taking us through some of those incredible stories.
Kevin, thank you very much. I look forward to it. Look forward to meeting you when I'm out there. And congratulations on a great hockey career and a great broadcast career as well.
What a gentleman. Steve Janaszak back to put a close here after a quick break. You're listening to Wooden Sticks here on the Talk North Podcast Network. All right, we're back to put a close on the show, and what an incredible bit of stories, and just what a gentleman, Steve Janaszak. Just you could feel what a great team player he had to have been, and we know how remarkable this man was on the ice, and the numbers speak for themselves, the accomplishments that go along with those numbers. But then you get a little window into having to be that backup guy, having the coach that recruited you and developed you and won national championships with you, going with the other guy on the biggest stage in 1980 at Lake Placid could not have been easy. And certainly the way that he handled that, the way that all those guys came together to be that team at that time, it goes a lot deeper than hockey. I can tell you that, because if he just went with the skill on the ice, they would have got beat by 6 or 7. So there was something more to that group, and I think you could feel that today in some of the energy that Steve Janaszak brought to the conversation. I could feel it for certain, and that had to be an unbelievably hard time in his life to find out that he wasn't going to play and he was going to be a part of something extraordinary, but not able to do what he loved the most, which is go out there and compete and play that goaltending position. And it clearly looks like he handled it with aplomb. And that has to be one of those behind the scenes parts of an incredible journey that probably shouldn't get lost in the shuffle, because without those relationships and those friendships and those team first mentalities, they probably never accomplish any of what they did. And maybe the greatest of all great upsets in sporting history. So really outstanding to hear some of his perspective today. And we can hear some more later this week. And here's how you can do it. Don't forget that this Thursday night, June 12th, over at the Parlay Kitchen and Bar, you can be a part of an incredible show. It is the Talk North Sports Report, and it's presented by Giggly THC Drinks. Got Mark Rosen, Lavelli Neal, Jim Suhan, John Krasinski, and of course, special guest this week, 5-time WNBA champion, Rebecca Brunson, who I know, and she is just incredible. They're going to break down everything, including the great start by the Minnesota Lynx. So they're going to cover all the bases in Minnesota sports. It's happening kind of in conjunction with the Twins home game. The doors will open at 3:00 right as the baseball game gets over. The show starts at 4:00. And then here's the cool part. Stick around after for an autograph signing with the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey legend, Steve Janaszak. You can RSVP right now at fanhq.com. Don't miss it. Steve is incredible, as you just heard, and you'll get a chance to take a picture, get an autograph, and go down memory lane again as we have a chance to reconnect with one of our own and a Minnesota sporting hero. And that's all going to happen Thursday over at Parlay Kitchen and Bar. Doors open at 3. The fun starts at 4. Got Mark Rosen there, so you know it's going to be top shelf. It's the Talk North Sports Report. More great hockey content, and as we record this the day after Game 3, Florida Panthers up 2-1. Before the series started, I said, my head says Florida, my heart says Edmonton. Nothing's changed. Florida has a pretty good stranglehold of the series right now, and I dare say Edmonton now is in a must-win situation. They had a game where they really let their emotions get the best of them. They've got to recalibrate. They've got to get that goaltender dialed in, Skinner. They've got to come out and play a near-perfect game. They can get Game 4 back and get to Edmonton 2-2. I think it's going to be an incredible 7-game series. If Florida continues the momentum they've created, it could be all done in a couple of games. So we'll see how it plays out. We talk everything hockey every week, and I can't wait to talk to you again next week here on Wooden Sticks, recording at the Talk North Podcast Studios.